First of all, thank you everyone for joining us today for the Laffer webinar. We have some great individuals that are going to present before Dr. Laffer. I did want to do some housekeeping before we go into details. Just to let everyone know, your mics are muted. If you have any questions, there is a chat feature and you are able to send those questions directly to me. At the end, we will pull a few questions to ask Dr. Laffer. If your question is not immediately answered, don't worry. We will try to get you a response via email as long as you're able to have those questions in the chat. We will try to get them to Dr. Laffer and answer your questions. So with that out of the way, I will pass the baton to Bill so that he can MC the remainder of our broadcast.
Great. Well, thank you, Empo, and welcome everyone. Today, we're all going to listen to Dr. Laffer about his book on Taxes Have Consequences, and I think we all know taxes have consequences. So we're going to hear from Dr. Laffer shortly, but before then, we have two subject matter experts who are going to be talking about tax strategies. And I am honored to have Stephen Mancini, whose law firm is out of San Diego, California, but he works with clients throughout the country. It's interesting that a number of subject matter experts that I know around the country in various fields actually go to this firm. They've got a tremendous reputation for some of the legal strategies that clients are using in estate planning, reducing capital gains tax, and reducing ordinary income. So today, Stephen is going to spend a few minutes, give us at a very high level some of these concepts. With that, Steve.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. So in our firm, we have a department for advanced planning and strategies for higher net worth clients. Next slide, please. We have the middle there is our law firm. We also have an educational institute at the top and a business consulting firm, the one at the bottom. Next slide, please. So when we get people coming to us, we work in the world of asset protection, income and capital gain taxes, as well as gift and estate taxes. Primarily, we deal with understanding clients and their assets, their current plans, what their goals are before we design integrated plans that achieve those goals. So with respect to taxes, we educate to motivate, and we try to find their comfort zone. Are they in the safe, conservative lane? Are they cutting edge, or do they want to go bleeding edge? As long as we educate them and they make a decision, we're fine with that. So integrated planning for us is designing a plan with multiple techniques in case one does not perform as expected, and demonstrating cash flows, performance, and assumptions. Such plans are flexible and usually require ongoing maintenance with a collaborative team. So you see this sheet in front of you. We often go onto our webpage and show potential clients when we first have what we call an introductory visit, because oftentimes clients are sent into us with, from an advisor, I want one of those CRTs, kind of like they're at McDonald's ordering a Big Mac. And we tell them, yes, you may need one of those, but first, here's the way we work. We have a process, and we show them these are maybe 60% of the possibilities out there, and there's some others that are more esoteric. But we don't know which one of these you would need and which combination you would need, because we don't yet know all of your assets. That would be malpractice. So we need to make sure that the client understands to engage us for us to essentially collect all of their data, which is the most difficult part of the whole thing, is to getting all of their data. They're not used to doing this. Once we get all of their data, we evaluate it. And then we have what we call an initial visit, which is a 4 to 6 hour meeting with the clients and the other advisors to discuss their goals, still not coming up with recommendations. Once we have that under our belt, then we can be engaged to design a plan with the other collaborative advisors. And it's that designing of the plan and building of what we call the preliminary plan, a design book, where we put all of these things together and come up with their goals. What we heard you, so here's the plan we think that will achieve your goals. And that's the way we go through this. So there are lots of possibilities. And once they see the plan, they can say, yes, I like that plan. You got most of it, but you didn't quite hit it. I don't like it at all. Go back to the drawing board. But at some point, they're going to approve a plan. Once they approve the plan, that's the blueprints. And then to execute on those blueprints, that's what we call implementation, whether it's us, firms in other states that we oversee, whether it's other collaborative advisors, life agents, financial advisors, and so forth, to do the implementation of these plans. And then, as I said earlier, we offer them an opportunity for what we call our family counselor, which is a maintenance plan where we and the rest of the collaborative advisors have meetings with them throughout the year in order to make sure that they stay on track in light of changing circumstances. We course correct wherever necessary, understand if their goals have changed, that sort of thing. So some of the things that we like, I've used what's been popular for estate taxes lately has been SLATs, spousal lifetime access trusts, for clients that don't really want to give it all away now, but still want to have sort of a backdoor access. There have been lots of techniques that we use. We use the incomplete non-grantor trusts. Lawyers are no different than other professions. We have lots of acronyms. So this is called an ING, an incomplete non-grantor trust. And if it's a NING, it's from Nevada, a WING is Wyoming, a DING is Delaware, and so forth. So we use a lot of those for where people want to, for example, they live in California, which is a high income tax state, and they sell their business they've had for many years with hardly any basis at all. And they're going to be facing not only a big capital gain tax, which we can do some other planning for, but they're facing a high California tax. If we do the planning right and we time it correctly, currently under California law, you can use one of the INGs and you can basically avoid the California the California income taxes on the transaction, which can be a substantial amount of money. Like all of these other techniques, the IRS is looking at them. So New York has outlawed the use of this. California is looking into it, but hasn't made any change yet. So the typical way this thing goes is there's a great technique and somebody just can't stand it because they market it and they go out and they tell the world about it. And next thing you know, the Wall Street Journal writes an article and some congressman doesn't like it and the loophole, so-called loophole, is closed. Then everybody regroups and tries to figure out another way around it. So that's the basic way that we do this in our practice, which is we don't go to solutions. We first have to understand the assets, and we then have to understand what the goals are, what their true and their heart of heart goals are. Forget all the legal and tax stuff. What do they really want? Most people do want to save, of course, in taxes, and we help them do that. But that's not where we start. So you can see there are tons of possibilities. A lot of them are duplicates because they're under different categories. If you can go to the next slide. It's all about timing, combining, and sequencing. So as I said earlier, when we have a plan, it's an integrated plan. We try to make it as simple and elegant as possible, because the more complicated things that you design, the less likely they're going to be maintained properly and understood. But we do our best to be elegant, but there are usually several boxes and arrows and cash flow patterns and that sort of thing, because it's all about timing, combining, and sequencing. And as I said earlier, we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket. We want to make sure that we have several possibilities in our plan in case one doesn't perform as planned. So I think for my time, I think I'm getting pretty close to the end of my time. I think the next slide is questions.
So we will save questions for the very end. I actually just recently put inside of the chat that anyone can also direct questions in chat to our subject matter experts that are presenting towards the end. So thank you, Stephen. I will now pass the baton to Bill.
Yeah, I think the reason I wanted to have Stephen speak today is his firm. And if you go to their website, they've got lots and lots of content. They're one of the most innovative firms in the country as it relates to reducing taxes for business owners, selling businesses, and so forth. So we only gave the subject matter experts limited time today, but I just wanted to expose him to the group. So now, as they say in the boxing world, the main event. uh, with Dr. Arthur Laffer. And I think people who have come to this call today obviously know his background. If there's anyone to speak about taxes in the country, this is probably the best authority. You Californians, going all the way back to Prop 13, working with Jarvis, that's why California has Prop 13. But he's also worked not only at the federal level, but with many state governors, many foreign leaders on tax policy. We all know, obviously, his background with President Reagan, and just a few years ago, receiving the Presidential Medal of Freedom for his economics with Donald Trump. My good friend, Arthur Laffer.
Thank you very much, Bill. It's really a pleasure being with all of you, and I love this group. You also can tell, by the way, I'm very involved with my financial coach, and you, Bill. I've been working with you for I don't know how long now. 30 years has it been? 40, maybe.
At least
a long time. And I'm really very proud to be a part equity owner and my financial coach, and also here. Now, I would like to start off by talking about the economy in general a little bit, just quickly. And the economy today is reminiscent. I was down in Mexico at this economic conference, and there was this story about the 4 Mexican finance ministers were out on a lake in a boat. The boat sprung a leak. And do you know what you called it?
no.
Cuatro Cinco. Sorry, I just want to just start off with a little bit of humor. I love the, by the way, talk earlier. My question for Stephen would be, if they change the law, is it retroactive to the procedure that you put in place, the plan you put into place? And I'll wait for that for later. But let me say about this election. I just want to start off on this election. I want to start off on governor's races. I've got something with a thing called the American Legislative Exchange Council. That's a big group that organizes all sorts of pro-growth legislators across the nation in all 50 states. And we have something called the Governor's Report. It's called the Laffer-Alec Governor's Report, where we look at every governor. We've ranked all 50 governors as to their pro-growth, pro-economic position. We came up with the top 10 this past year. And of the top 10, 8 were up for election this year. Of those 8, all 8 were reelected, and by the largest amounts ever. I mean, DeSantis was one of them. On the Democratic side, Jared Polis was one of them. And I really wish to suggest to all of you, if you want to see a really amazing Democrat, look at Bill Maher's show this weekend, this past weekend, where they interviewed Governor Polis from Colorado. He was an intern in my office. I'm involved with him in lots of stuff as a Democrat. He's the most pro-growth Democrat. The other governors that won the election were all very pro-growth, tax cutters, pro-growth. Include Kristi Noem, who was #1, Bill Lee. I could go through all of these government. Abbott was one of those groups that I mentioned, DeSantis. All of these governors were really good. They won by very large majorities. On a personal note, my son-in-law decided last year to run for state Senate in Michigan, the 17th district, which is down by Hillsdale on the border of Indiana. He decided to run there. There was an incumbent, Kim Lasada, who was running for re-election on the Senate. My son-in-law went out and knocked on 10,000 doors during his campaign. He was opposed by Right to Life, even though he's pro-life. He was opposed by the 7 prosecutors and sheriffs group. The whole group was opposed. They gave money to his opponent. Also, the group in Grand Rapids there, the DeVos family gave money to the opponent. He was opposed by almost all of the major groups because he was not at the incumbent. But by knocking on all those doors, by being very pro-economics, talking about tax cuts, getting good growth, he won his election in the primary 61-39. He just did a huge landslide victory in the primary, which is the first time that an incumbent has been defeated in Michigan since 1986. He won the general election with a 65+% vote in the election. He's coming into the state Senate. Now, he is a Green Beret, Special Forces, 7 years in the military, 3 tours of duty, Yale grad. He married my youngest daughter. They are expecting their 3rd child. So when you look at the election results here, when the Republicans go off message, when they talk about retribution, when they talk about all these other sorts of things, as opposed to basic, simple economics, they always get hammered. And that, unfortunately, is what the Republicans did this time, whether you're going to be going after Hunter Biden or election deniers or all these other issues there, the Supreme Court, whatever the issues are, economics is the key. As James Carville said, it's the economy, stupid. And if the Republicans were to have run on economics and economics alone, I think they would have had a lot better outcomes than actually happened. And it's very simple economics. I mean, and I'm just going to go through it with you very quickly. The first pillar of prosperity is taxation. I mean, you know, when you look at taxation, what you want to have is all taxes are bad, but some taxes are worse than others. What you want to do is the government should collect its revenues in the least damaging fashion possible. And when you look at what this means with regard to a tax system, it means the lowest possible tax rate on the broadest possible tax base. The lowest rate, because you want to provide people with the least incentives to evade, avoid, or otherwise not report taxable income. And the broadest base, so you provide people with the least places where they can put their income and avoid paying taxes. The North Star of taxation is the lowest possible rate on the broadest possible base. Now, the second pillar of prosperity is we all know we need government. You know, we need highways, we need schools, we need military, we need judiciary, we need all that. But when the government goes beyond its concept, beyond its expertise, when it does stimulus spending, when it does all of that, it does nothing but hurt the economy. Government spending beyond what those services are necessary is taxation, and it will hurt the economy. I mean, I try to explain it quickly to people. Have you ever heard of a poor person spending himself into wealth? It just doesn't happen. And government spending is taxation, and it hurts the economy. It doesn't help it. So low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint on the part of governments, large and small. Number three, sound money. There's nothing that can bring the economy to its knees faster than high inflation, and that an unbacked currency, paper currency, can do. When we took office in January 1981, January 20th, the prime interest rate in the US was 21.5%. Inflation was running at 15, 16, 17%. It was very high. The same type of situation exists today. And what you really want to do is have a sound money, so you know what the value is of $1 20 years from now, and that it's the same as it is now, so that we don't have inflation. Low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money. The third pillar of prosperity, the fourth pillar, excuse me, is minimal regulations. We all know we need regulations. You can't wake up one morning and drive on the left-hand side of the road, then the next morning on the right. We all need regulations, but what you want to make sure is those regulations don't go beyond the specific purposes at hand and create a lot of collateral damage in the economy. You need minimal regulation, low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, and minimal regulations. And lastly, free trade. And there's probably nothing more dysfunctional for a country than having protectionism. The Smoot-Hawley tariff was my book, our book, really. I wrote it with Brian Dimitrovic and Gene Sinkfield. Our book, The Taxes Have Consequences. We look at the Great Depression, and it started literally with the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which was the largest tax increase on traded products in U.S. history. The stock market had started its collapse in the last quarter of 1929. It was down 35% from September, and it then continued on down to being 5% of its previous high, and we were in the midst of the Great Depression, all because of taxes on traded products. Believe me when I tell you. So you need to have low rate, broad-based, flat tax, spending restraint, sound money, minimal regulations, and free trade. And then what you want is the government gets the heck out of the way and lets people solve the economy themselves. This is the proper way to do it. If you look at those 8 governors that were reelected by the largest percentage, that is exactly what these governors had done. They had been the least invasive on COVID-19 restrictions. They were cutting taxes. For example, Jared Polis just put through the largest property tax cut in Colorado history, cut the income tax, was very hands off with regard to COVID. Same thing with DeSantis. Same thing with Kemp in Georgia. Same thing with Abbott in Texas. I could go on and on. Kristi Noem was just phenomenal in South Dakota. So when you look at it, it's not only good politics, but it's also very good economics to create prosperity. Now, I do want to go through a little bit what I have in my book, Taxes Have Consequences, which is literally a tax history of the U.S. income tax. Now, when we put in the income tax in 1913, we had to pass a constitutional amendment first, the 16th Amendment to the Constitution, which allowed for a progressive income tax. 6 months after that was done, Woodrow Wilson put in the first progressive income tax in the U.S., where the highest rate was 7%, just 7%. And the number of filers in 2013 was about 358,000 people out of a population, adult population of 62 million. So it was a little teeny tiny percentage of all adults had to file taxes even. And even when they filed, the highest possible tax rate was 7%. That was the tax in 1913. That tax stayed the same from 13 to 14 to 15. And then they popped that tax up to 1918 because of the pandemic and World War I. So they say they've always got a good excuse. In 1918, the highest tax rate was 77%, and they'd increased the number of filers 17-fold to about 6.5 million people had to file. That was what happened there. After the war, Wilson decided to be very generous to the American people. He cut the highest tax rate down from 77% to 73%. Hey, you're welcome. You're welcome. Don't need to thank me too much, but that's your gift for being the tax there. And that's what happened. The election of 1920 was all about taxes. In 1920, it was Cox and Roosevelt was the Democratic ticket, where Cox was the governor of Ohio. Roosevelt was the undersecretary of the Navy. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, by the way, who ran against Harding and Coolidge, the Republican ticket. Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge. Calvin Coolidge and Warren Harding won by the largest percentage ever because they promised to cut tax rates back to where they were prior to World War I. The largest victory ever. What happened is they took office in 1922. In March, they started their tax bills. March of 1921. They started their tax bills, which didn't really take effect until 1923. And what you had was the deepest depression following World War I, excuse me. And then they cut taxes like mad. They cut taxes down to 25%, from 77% to 25%. And you got something called the Roaring '20s. This is a period of incredible expansion in the economy. I mean, the interest rates were low. Inflation fell during that whole period. Not inflation, prices fell during that whole period. Budget ran surpluses. Federal budget was in surplus. The economy boomed. Then you got the Smoot-Hawley tariff in 29. Then you got the 1932 tax increase by Herbert Hoover. He raised, I mean, just think of this, in 1932, retroactively, he raised the highest marginal income tax rate from 25% to 63%. I mean, just imagine that. He put in a death tax, a gift tax. He raised all sorts of taxes across the board. And of course, the economy went into a tailspin. Unemployment rates went up to 20, 25, 30% in this Great Depression. Really horrible time period. Revenues, of course, fell through the floor. They did not do there. It was a terrible period. Roosevelt won the election. First thing Roosevelt did when he came into office in 1933 in March was he confiscated all privately held gold at $20.67 an ounce. He waited 6 months, and 6 months after he confiscated all the gold, criminal penalties, mind you. He did that. He raised the price of gold to $35 an ounce, which accounted for one of the biggest wealth taxes in U.S. history by far. It was incredible. The economy stayed in the doldrums. In 1937, he raised the highest tax rate to 79%. Then in 1944, he raised the highest tax rate to 94%. I mean, if you made $1 then, you were allowed to keep 6 cents. I mean, that's amazing. There was a slight cut in tax rates after World War II. Slight, mind the way, they cut from 94% to 82%. But if you're in that tax bracket, that's a threefold increase in your after-tax return. All the tax bills that were passed were vetoed first by Harry Truman and then passed over his veto. By the time we got to Eisenhower, Harry Truman because of the Korean War had raised tax rates back up to 91%. So during the whole Eisenhower period, they stayed at 91%. Kennedy came into office in 1961. He cut the highest tax rate from 91% to 70%. He cut the lowest rate from 20 to 14%, got rid of the investment, put in an investment tax credit, cut all sorts of other taxes on traded products, et cetera. We had a boom called the go-go 60s, where we had huge surpluses. We ran a surplus in the budget. And then we had the four stooges, Johnson, Nixon, Ford, and Carter, all four of which were the bipartisan. I mean, I call it the largest assemblage of bipartisan ignorance put on planet Earth. And they raised taxes during that period. And of course, we had the doldrums. And then we had, oh, be still my heart, Ronald Reagan come in, and we cut taxes. And we have the modern era where the highest tax rate has dropped down to now below 40%. In fact, when Reagan left office, the highest marginal income tax rate was 28%, which is just phenomenal. The lowest rate was 15%. There were only two tax brackets back then. We have a history of taxes that is really incredible in this country of ours. We've gone from as high as 94 down to 7 to 28%. We've had massive variations, and we know a lot of facts about it. Now, in truth, everyone is allowed to have his or her own opinion. You are allowed to have your opinion, but you're not allowed to have your own facts. And the facts are very simple and come from this book. By the way, lots of other stuff, but the facts are, whenever you raise taxes on the top 1% of income earners, the economy way underperforms. Whenever you lower taxes on the top 1% of income earners, the economy outperforms. It's like clockwork. Anyone who tells you you can raise taxes on the rich and have prosperity does not understand Econ 1 and surely does not know any of the data with regard to tax returns and the statistics of income of the IRS. They just don't. And by the way, we have every single tax return available. So number one, when taxes are raised, the economy underperforms. When they're lowered, the economy outperforms, period. Number two, when tax rates on the rich are raised, the biggest damage is done to the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised. Higher taxes on the rich hurt the poorest segments of society, and it happens every single time. The Great Depression did not help poor people, did not help the lowest income echelons at all. It was horrible for them. It hurt the rich. That's very true. It did hurt the rich, but it hurt the poor a lot more, and there was no redistributive aspect whatsoever to that. High tax rates lead to underperformance of the economy and especially damage to the poor. When you cut tax rates on the rich, you get a well-performing economy, and also the biggest beneficiaries of the good economy are the poor, the minorities, and the disenfranchised in the system. Clear as a bell every single time, no exceptions in the whole history of the tax returns. Thirdly, and the shocker is, whenever you raise tax rates on the rich, it does hurt the rich. Their incomes go down, but what they do earn, they shelter. And they shelter. The higher tax rates are, the more sheltering the rich do. And so tax revenues, because of the drop in income and because of the increase in tax sheltering, revenues from the rich go down. Every time we've raised tax rates on the rich, revenues from the rich have gone down. Every time we lower tax rates on the rich earn more, and they don't shelter as much, tax revenues rise. The last thing I want to tell you that comes out of the book that's really important, and these are just facts based on 100% of the tax returns. And if you look at the book, you'll just be shocked at the results. I mean, if you look at it, when tax rates are high, tax revenues from the rich are a little bit less than 2%, between 1.5% and 2% of GDP running along. But tax revenues from the bottom 95% go way up to as high as 7% of GDP there. When you cut tax rates in the rich, the tax revenues from the rich as a share of GDP rise to about 3.5%, 4%, and tax revenues from the lowest 95% drop down dramatically to where they're approximately the same. You know, when you look at the facts, and I wish Bernie Sanders were, Bill, is any chance Bernie Sanders is listening to us today? Or
maybe.
And how about AOC, and how about Bill Gates, and how about some of these other wonders of the world? You know, the facts are the facts. When you raise tax rates, the economy goes into the doldrums. The rich get hurt, but they shelter, and the poor get damaged dramatically. And tax revenues from the rich go down, not up. And the taxes on the lowest echelons rise. That's the facts. The whole time period here. You guys have to understand this, and I know you understand this more than probably any group on earth because of all the ways you look at how to save on taxes and to help people make it through. Those plans, those ways of getting around or getting getting through taxes are all schemes that require tax rates to be high. If tax rates had been zero, if we had a low flat rate based tax, there would be no need for all of us to try to figure out how to reduce our tax burden. And it's just amazing how successful all of you have been in countering really silly government policies. Now, the last thing I want to mention on taxes here is this will be a period, the next period will be one of very important state policies. And let me just say this, that of all the states that raise tax rates, their performance outperforms the rest of the economy. Those states that have been lowering tax rates have way outperformed the economy. Higher tax rates, less performance, lower tax rates, higher performance. I think I've gone through with most of you the 11 states that have introduced the income tax since 1960. That includes West Virginia, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Maine, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Michigan. It includes Nebraska. It includes all those states that have introduced an income tax since 19. All those states have declined relative to the rest of the nation, each and every one of them in every metric. You know, what I want to say here is that when you look at taxes, and this is a big theme that's going to be in the next 2 years, you've got the new IRS agents coming in, you've got $80 billion spent on that. We're going to have that. Just remember that when you look at the economy, taxes have enormous consequences. And the last message I'll leave with you, Bill, is, you know, I have never heard of an economy taxed into prosperity. It just doesn't make any sense. And now after this election, I have never heard politicians get defeated by promising lower taxes, restrained spending, sound money, minimal regulations, and free trade. And Bill, I'll throw it open for questions if I can at this level, if that's okay.
Yeah, so well, thank you. And I will have my book report done by the weekend.
Good, please. I think you guys will like it. There's a whole chapter. Chapter 2 is on all the tax sheltering schemes that have been done since the beginning of the tax into state and local bonds, which are not, they weren't even reportable historically. Mrs. Dodge, you'll love how she had all of her fortune in state and local bonds. No one even knew how much she had. All the stuff on Spanish law versus English. I mean, it's just way cool.
It's a great book. It's a great book. Empo, do we have some questions that have come in?
Yeah, so by the way, everyone, just to let everyone know, if you go to the chat feature, this is where we will be answering all of your questions. If we are not able to get to it, we will try to have Dr. Laffer answer the questions afterwards. So please do use the chat feature. The first question we have for you, Dr. Laffer, is do you think the US will have a recession? And if so, do you expect a hard or a soft landing?
You know, I'm not one that a recession is caused by controlling inflation. The way I look at the economy is, imagine for a second that we had no inflation whatsoever for the next 30 years. I told you with guaranteed that there will be no inflation for the next 30 years. What do you think would happen to the stock market and the economy? And obviously it would go straight up. Getting rid of inflation is not recessionary. I know everyone says Paul Volcker caused a recession, but it was not Paul Volcker's policy that caused a recession in 1981-82. It was the deferral of the tax cuts. If you know that taxes are going to be lower next year than they are this year, you will defer all of the income you possibly can to next year, which causes a downturn. The same thing happened under Kennedy, as happened under Reagan, as it happened under. It's not monetary policy. So my guess is non-monetary policy is not what's going to cause a recession, although many people are worried about that. Mine is really worried about fiscal policy. And when I look at fiscal policy, I think we've already had a recession. The first 2 quarters of this year were negative. The latest quarter was 2.6% annualized, which is not very high. The third quarter, I don't see a really rapid growth in the fourth quarter either. I think what we've got in this country is not a recession, but a secular decline in growth rates that's going to last as long as we have these types of spending policies, these types of regulatory policies, and these types of trade policies. all of which are very anti-growth. You know, if you want to look at a recession or a long-term secular decline and counter it, you've got to lower tax rates and broaden the tax base. You've got a spending restraint. We've gone from debt to GDP of being almost 82% of GDP to 125% of GDP in just a matter of a few years, 4 years. You know, that is really conducive to slow growth over the long period. You need sound money. I don't see sound money coming yet. This administration has done all it could to expand the Fed balance sheet, to continue the inflation on into the future. And then regulations, you know, they've not been good on regulations, and surely they've not been good on free trade at all. So I don't see any of the major pillars of prosperity that tell me this economy is going to accelerate in growth and become more prosperous. The way I would describe it is not a recession. I would describe it as a continuation of a secular decline in economic growth. And that secular decline is devastating over long periods of time. I mean, we are barely above today the employment levels we had in February of 2020. We are in a long-term decline that really needs a radical change in policies. And unfortunately, the Republicans didn't run on that. And if they had, I think they would have been elected and we could have been very successful. But we need to get an agenda that just looks at the, if there's one thing the Republicans have been accused of, and quite correctly, is they are boring and dull and technical and base their policies on facts. I mean, literally facts. And they are the stewards of the economy. And when Republicans go off on all sorts of tangents, election vilification or other social issues or all these things, they lose the agenda and the economy suffers as a consequence.
Thank you for that. Our next question, I think, is to summarize is you share all this information of hey, people oftentimes will shelter their money when taxes are high, and then when they're lower, people tend to shelter less of it. Do you feel that there's a reason why more of the public is not aware of these facts, or is there just not an incentive to teach this, or why is it that this is not more known?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the economy does know how. I mean, especially the highest income earners really know how to do it. I mean, Warren Buffett in his letter to the New York Times in 2011 about his 2010 tax return, I mean, effectively, his income was $12 billion that year, and he paid $7 million in taxes, which all was legal sheltering, unrealized capital gains, gifts to 501c3s, the right, all of that was, and a lot of the advice that he took. Obviously, Berkshire Hathaway is an insurance company which gets to deduct future outlays present. So there are a lot of ways of bringing it down. But really, the stuff we're discussing here is really people of higher incomes get much more advantage from tax sheltering than do people of very low incomes. And also, you've got to understand that people of higher incomes, generally speaking, have access to lawyers, accountants, myfinancialcoach.com, people, I mean, really experts in the thing that can really give them good, they have access to that, and they have the wherewithal to be able to take advantage of that. And that is, of course, the natural way of a market always does that, Empo. I mean, they do that very well. So it's really hard to sell tax reform and tax sheltering down to people who only make $50,000 a year income and don't have a substantial wealth. So the benefits of tax sheltering are much more tilted towards higher income, higher wealth people. And higher income and higher wealth people have many more ways of sheltering. They can change the location of their income. Look at the migrations patterns among states or countries. They can change the composition of their income, what we've been talking about today with the experts. By the way, beautiful conversations and discussions there. I really was impressed by them. They can not only change, they can change the timing of their income, and they can change the volume of their income. And all of these are what our financial experts can really educate people on what to do and how to do it, so they get to keep the income they truly deserve. And that's what happens with this. And when tax rates go down and all that happens, the incentive to shelter income diminishes dramatically. At zero taxes, I don't see why anyone would worry about a tax shelter. Maybe I missed that in Econ 1. Just joking. You know, all the tax structures really provide the raison d'etre of my financial coach and the experts, which is, you know, basically for higher income, higher wealth level people, because they have the means for it and they also have the incentive to do it.
Well, Dr. Laffer, we want to thank you for the time that you've given us today. I know that you have quite a busy schedule with your book. Would you just like to maybe close with a few thoughts, maybe also tell our listeners how they might be able to find themselves a copy?
Well, they can, Amazon has it. And if anyone wants to send it, I'll sign one if they want to send it to me. And I obviously pay for the books being sent back. I would be more than happy to do that for you. And by the way, I had one question for Stephen, by the way, if I may. You know, when they changed the laws on, what do you call them, winks and dinks and kinks or whatever it is, dings on those, when they changed the law, does that change in the law go back retroactively? In other words, the plan you put in last year in California, let's say, and let's say California's legislature is now ticked off and they now disallow it. Do they disallow it retroactively?
Generally, they do not. So if you do it beforehand, you should be grandfathered in, as they say. But who knows what will happen in this current environment? I don't know.
Well, in my book on states, by the way, lots of times the federal government has raised taxes retroactively. Herbert Hoover did that in 1932. He retroactively passed the bill in, I think, June or July, retroactive to January 1st. And by the way, you know, that's true of a lot of tax bills. Now, they used to have it where with capital gains taxation, when it passes through the Ways and Means Committee is when it's considered its effective date. But it's just amazing the type of charlatanism they can get away with, isn't it?
It really is. And we were I was just talking with Info before the program started that a couple of trends that we've had are people coming in wanting to leave the state of California and sometimes not really understanding the rules because they don't want to leave their families, grandkids, and social institutions. And the other is that we have a lot of clients coming in that say to us essentially what you said, which is, I don't mind paying my fair share of taxes, but this is ridiculous. How can we avoid it?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And you know, I left California in 2006. I was on the Governor's Council of Economic Advisors, part-time thing with Milton Friedman and George Schultz and the whole group there. And when he turned to the dark side, I decided to leave. I wrote a paper called California, Who Are You and Why I'm Leaving California. And, you know, I had to get ex-IRS agents who are lawyers to go through, and I did my planning very, very carefully, just the way people should do with my financial coach. I mean, seriously, you got experts. Anyone who does not use experts and leaves California is going to get killed. They know how to get the money out of you unless you have as much expertise on your side as they have on their side.
They're talking about an exit tax right now.
Well, I know, but even an exit tax, you know, believe me, where there's a will, there is a way. In fact, the thing is, when Morgenthau under Roosevelt hired all the new IRS agents, you know, it was fantastic. They had huge amounts of these IRS agents they hired. What happened was the private market let those IRS agents work in the IRS for about 2 years to become really experts. And then they hired them away from the IRS to become private agents to then work against the IRS. And of course, Morgenthau had many beautiful statements of, we actually lost money by hiring all these new tax agents. These guys actually went back and did better jobs at protecting the incomes of the thief. And that's the way I look at you guys, Steve, and with the way I look at my financial coaches. You have a right to keep the amount of taxes to minimize the amount of taxes legally that you can. Everything else is a bonus and a tip. And I don't want to give California IRS agents or the government there a tip, frankly. That's my view. They then use the money to hire rats to attack you. I mean, it is crazy. Well,
okay, well, thank you, Dr.
thanks, all,
Laffer.
guys.
Thank you, Dr. Laffer. And the first 25 that registered for this webinar will be getting a signed copy from Dr. Laffer